That is rather hard for me to accept. It is very normal, as there are many events from the past, from the history of mankind that you don't know about. This is because the historical records have been destroyed innumerable times by the rulers of different eras with the intention that the people should remain unaware of the history of past mistakes and unable to learn from them. An ignorant nation is easier to manipulate. As the proverb says, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Nevertheless, if you look closely, you will see that in many cultures there are ancestral traditions that have been transmitted orally from generation to generation, which claim that the origin of their people or race is outside the earth, in people who came from the stars. Since you have talked about the great evolutionary leap that the earth may live through, I would like to know more about that supposed wonderful future that awaits us, which I see as a very remote and quite frankly utopian possibility, given the distressing circumstances of the planet and humanity at the moment. But that future that you think is so unlikely is a reality on thousands of millions of planets. And although the Earth and its humanity is in a pitiful state right now, in a matter of a couple of centuries things can turn around dramatically. Do you want an example? Compare the technological level of humanity in the year 1800 with that of the same humanity in the year 2000. The progress is really amazing. But if you were able to go back 200 years to tell the humans of that era about it, nobody would believe you. Imagine if humans were to apply the same will and enthusiasm to spiritual advancement as they applied to mental and material development. Right now the earth is going through a phase of spiritual awakening. When all those spirits that wish to awaken have done so and actually start working on it, things will change very fast. Could you describe how the more evolved civilizations, those that follow the law of love, actually live, to see if they can serve as a model example for us? I would be delighted. I will describe the civilizations that are just 1 or 2 steps higher in evolution than yours, because it would be very difficult for you to understand how civilizations that are much more advanced live. Anyway, bear in mind that no civilization is the same as another. However, there are some things that they all have in common, and I will describe these things because they refer to the spiritual part. The most important thing of all is that these civilizations are aware of the process of individual and collective spiritual evolution. Consequently, they put all their effort into attaining the spiritual advancement of each one of their inhabitants and the whole of their humanity. Hence, all norms, laws, forms of government, and the management of resources are based upon the law of love and the other spiritual laws. As a result, there is no expression of individual or collective forms of hatred or egoism, nor any kind of violence or any kind of abuse of some beings towards others. So there are no wars, no terrorism, no crime of any type, no murders, no prostitution, no kidnapping, no dictatorships, no militarism, and no slavery, because they all consider themselves as brothers and sisters. That seems like a utopia. How have they achieved this? Because they have come to the conclusion that egoism only leads to destruction and suffering, and that the only way to be truly happy is to love. So they have poured all their energy into developing love and progressively eliminating egoism from their hearts. As a result of this, they have transformed their worlds into harmonious homes in which to live. But don't think that it has been a bed of roses to get to this point. They have also had to experience a costly process of evolution. They have had to suffer the consequences of their egoistic attitudes and had to face vicissitudes similar to yours. The difference between some worlds and others is how quickly they have understood that the path of egoism and lack of love leads nowhere. And what can you tell me about their government and political and economic structure? Normally, each planet has one common planetary government. There are no divisions between countries or nations with independent governments, although each region maintains its historical peculiarities. and there are autonomous governments that are integrated into the structure of the planetary government. The state controls and manages the means of production in accordance with the needs of the inhabitants of the planet in order to achieve common well-being. In other words, there are no private enterprises because there are no private interests that benefit a few people to the detriment of others. Hence, there is no need for promotion of excessive consumption of products through publicity to maintain company profits, although there are ways of measuring the value of effort that correspond to the amount of work time spent on it, which serve to purchase certain material assets. Money as such as something that has an independent value does not exist. Therefore, all activities intended to make profits through any kind of speculative financial business, such as banks, stock markets, etc., have been eliminated. Owing to this, the economy is extraordinarily stable, as there is no inflation, no devaluation or appreciation of the currency, no increases or decreases of interest rates, simply because the concept of interest does not exist. If the cost of some products varies, it depends solely on the availability of the resources to produce them. As these societies have a great capacity for farsightedness, they have been able to free themselves from the dependency on certain raw materials and exhaustible energy sources. They take very good care of the environment and have gradually been adopting renewable, non-contaminating energy sources. They produce very little waste, almost 100% of which is recycled. On a social level, everybody, through the mere fact of existing, has certain minimum rights which are unshakable, such as the right to have food, a dwelling place, education, and work. Therefore, there is no hunger, no homelessness, no mortgages, no poverty, no unemployment, and no lack of schooling. The material standard of living of the inhabitants is quite comfortable and very similar for every individual and in all regions throughout the planet. As there is no egoism, there is no urge in the inhabitants of these planets to accumulate wealth or material properties. And what work do they do, if indeed they do work? They mainly work in education and scientific and technological research for the common good to improve as much as possible the standard of living of all inhabitants in all areas, in order to promote individual and collective spiritual evolution. The heaviest physical jobs in the primary and secondary sectors, namely agriculture and industry, have been totally automated, and in these cases the professional's task is to supervise the production processes. The working days are much shorter than on your planet, although more productive, because nobody is doing unpleasant jobs or jobs that don't suit their vocation. At the same time, no one is idle or lives off the work of others, as all the people enjoy contributing to the common well-being with their work. Certain jobs that exist on Earth dedicated to buying and selling, such as salesmen or publicists, don't exist, as this particular type of society avoids the need to promote products. They only produce what is necessary, with everyone taking their corresponding part without the need for pressure to consume more or less. Consequently, there is no fashion, and consumption habits are not updated arbitrarily, but rather, when there are better products that help to improve health and the inner and outer well-being of the inhabitants. Once all superfluous activities have been eliminated, societies advance very rapidly, both technologically and spiritually, as individuals are no longer enslaved to egoistic activities that are eminently materialistic or destructive. What you are describing seems a bit like the communist or socialist systems of some countries on Earth. In some ways, but on Earth that system has failed totally. Bear in mind that in the countries on Earth where socialism was introduced, it was imposed using violence and never had a spiritual side, only the material side. Despite the apparent sense of collectivity, the reality is that individual egoism, which is the basis of all inequality, promoted the appearance of dominant classes that forced their opinions on the rest. For socialism to be real and functional, it must also be spiritual, not just a material framework, and it has to be adopted by an inner conviction, never by coercion through the use of force, as has happened in your world. In other words, it is necessary to eradicate egoism from the interior of each person and substitute it with love, and then the physical changes will appear spontaneously, on a collective level, as a logical consequence of the internal change. In contrast to the egoistic, materialistic, and atheistic socialism on Earth, these worlds live what you could call a spiritual socialism. And what is the government system? That is to say, do they have democracies, republics, or monarchies? None of those names would be the correct term. It is the government of the most evolved beings. The greatest responsibility is given to whoever has the greatest capacity in terms of wisdom and love. Is there any kind of government on Earth that is similar? The most similar is that of some American Indian tribes with their councils of elders. How are the rulers elected? Well, this varies on each planet. Normally, there are different councils, formed by representatives from different areas, and within the council, the coordinator is elected through the voting of the members of the council, which can either be rotating or more long-term according to the planet. And how do they become part of those councils? As a result of the abilities shown by certain individuals during their childhood, their education is focused towards management tasks. As their ability develops, they go on to hold positions of greater responsibility in accordance with the existing needs of certain management functions. That doesn't seem to be a very democratic system, but rather it appears to be a very hierarchical form of government. It does not seem to me to be the people's choice, but rather that the higher classes choose their successors. The people of these worlds agree with this form of government because they know that the government is in the hands of the most wise and loving people. Those who govern intend to dominate, to oppress, or to abuse their power, which is what happens in your world, but rather totally the contrary. They see it as an opportunity to help their brothers and sisters progress, making maximum use of their abilities. Neither do they feel the urge to perpetually hold on to their power in order to accumulate wealth and privileges, as that is not their intention either, nor does the holding of those positions represent any special privileges compared to the rest of the inhabitants. Besides, many of the decisions that affect the citizens as a whole are made through referendum. But this sounds like oligarchies to me, where only a chosen few have the option to govern. It is true that access to the government tasks of those worlds is not available to just anybody. But what happens here is precisely the contrary to what happens on Earth, where the powerful elite is formed by members of the richest and, economically speaking, most powerful families, these normally being people of low spiritual level who are extremely egoistic and ambitious for wealth and power. In these worlds, just the opposite occurs. Leadership is given precisely to the least egoistic, to those who have the most elevated level of love, to the humblest and wisest. It still seems to me a very hierarchical way of governing, where the same people are governing for too long. It is normal for you to see it that way because in your world you are used to seeing that the people who have been in power for a certain period of time, if at first they were not corrupt, end up being corrupt and using power for their own benefit or for the benefit of certain powerful groups, harming the rest. But it doesn't happen like that in these worlds. That doesn't seem to be a very democratic system, but rather it appears to be a very hierarchical form of government. It does not seem to me to be the people's choice, but rather that the higher classes choose their successors. The people of these worlds agree with this form of government because they know that the government is in the hands of the most wise and loving people. Those who govern intend to dominate, to oppress, or to abuse their power, which is what happens in your world, but rather totally the contrary. They see it as an opportunity to help their brothers and sisters progress, making maximum use of their abilities. Neither do they feel the urge to perpetually hold on to their power in order to accumulate wealth and privileges, as that is not their intention either, nor does the holding of those positions represent any special privileges compared to the rest of the inhabitants. Besides, many of the decisions that affect the citizens as a whole are made through referendum. But this sounds like oligarchies to me, where only a chosen few have the option to govern. It is true that access to the government tasks of those worlds is not available to just anybody. But what happens here is precisely the contrary to what happens on Earth, where the powerful elite is formed by members of the richest and, economically speaking, most powerful families, these normally being people of low spiritual level who are extremely egoistic and ambitious for wealth and power. In these worlds, just the opposite occurs. Leadership is given precisely to the least egoistic, to those who have the most elevated level of love, to the humblest and wisest. It still seems to me a very hierarchical way of governing, where the same people are governing for too long. It is normal for you to see it that way because in your world you are used to seeing that the people who have been in power for a certain period of time, if at first they were not corrupt, end up being corrupt and using power for their own benefit or for the benefit of certain powerful groups, harming the rest. But it doesn't happen like that in these worlds. Now and then, and that apparent democracies with periodic elections and political parties in opposition are just a cover-up to conceal a dictatorship of an elite whose only objective is to keep the people in ignorance so that they can continue their abuse. What is the education like? Spirit, mind, and body are educated as a whole to their full potential and orientated in accordance with their vocation. In these worlds, extrasensory perception is highly developed. Thanks to this, the teachers know their students much better, which allows them to know their capability, their vocation, and their concerns. Apart from the intellectual training, the individual's potential, which you don't even acknowledge yet, is developed, which allows them to develop their own connection with superior spirituality, such as clairvoyance, telepathy, and psychokinesis. What kind of beliefs do they have? Religions as such do not exist, understanding religion to be a structured organization with priests and dogmas which somehow you need to join, believe in certain dogmas and follow certain norms. As I have said before, what does exist is a very clear consciousness of spiritual reality, the origin and destiny of each being, and of the laws that govern the universe, and this is reflected in every activity developed on the planet, in education, the economy, politics, etc. If you like the video, leave a comment and a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and see you in the next video.